Miss Isabella, right? His voice, cooler than the raindrops outside, was surprisingly pleasant, like the lowest string of a cello. I looked up and met his eyes, a pale gray blue, like the frost-kissed surface of Hyde Park's lake at dawn. I knew who he was, Samuel Harper. A regular fixture in the financial pages, and the helm of Harper architecture. Rumor had it that the glass curtain walls he designed could make the shadow of Tower Bridge flow across their surfaces. What I couldn't fathom was why someone like him would step into my little bookstore, tucked away in an old neighborhood where the heating flickered on and off. He pulled a document from his briefcase and set it on my dusty cash register. Its dark brown leather cover bore the gilded word, contract, stark and jarring. I need a wife, for 6 months, he said, his tone as casual as if discussing the weather. In return, I'll pay off all the bookstore's debts and inject enough capital for a full renovation. I nearly crushed the fountain pen in my hand. Outside, the rain intensified, pattering heavily against the glass and blurring his features. Mr. Harper, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady, surely you're joking? Marriage isn't something to. I never joke. He cut me off, his gray-blue eyes utterly unreadable. My grandfather's will stipulates I must be married by 30 to inherit the family trust fund. And my 30th birthday is next Monday. He paused, adding, during the contract period, we can live in separate rooms, pretend to be a loving couple in public, and not interfere in each other's private lives. After 6 months, we'll divorce amicably, and you'll receive a sum sufficient to keep this bookstore running comfortably for 10 years. I twirled the pen between my fingers, glancing at the Patek Philippe peeking out from his suit cuff, then back at the shocking red numbers in the ledger. The landlord had given me an ultimatum last week. If I didn't pay the rent soon, I'd be evicted from this bookstore, which I'd inherited from my mother. Why me? I asked the crucial question. London was full of women eager to marry into wealth. He had no reason to seek out a stranger who ran a tiny bookstore. His gaze drifted over the neatly arranged collection of Dickens on the shelf, then returned to my face, this time, with a faint softness I hadn't noticed before. Last Wednesday afternoon, I took shelter from the rain here, he said. I watched you give your last umbrella to a single mother holding a baby, then run back into the store, drenched. He paused. Kindness was what my grandfather valued most. You meet all the requirements. I thought back to that downpour. So the man who'd stood quietly reading A Tale of Two Cities by the bookshelf was him. Sunlight filtering through the rain had gilded his profile, making him look like a nobleman from a classical painting. I need time to think, I said. I'll be in the cafe across the street at 10 tomorrow morning, waiting for your answer. He left a business card on the counter, then stepped back into the rain. The bell jingled again, and silence settled over the store, leaving only the contract and a faint cedar scent lingering in the air. The rain had stopped by the next day, and London's sky was clear for a change. Sunlight streamed through the cafe's floor-to-ceiling windows, casting spots of light on Samuel's coffee cup. I pushed the signed contract across the table to him. I have one condition, I said. During the contract period, you must come to the bookstore to read with me at least 3 times a week. He raised an eyebrow, surprise flicking across his gray-blue eyes, then he laughed. It was the first time I'd seen him smile, and it was like watching ice melt over a lake, softening even the sunlight around him. Deal, he said. Our wedding was a small affair, attended only by a few relatives and friends. My bridesmaid was Lillian, my childhood best friend. She squeezed my hand, her face filled with worry. Bella, are you sure about this? It's such a risk. I looked across the room at Samuel, who was talking to the pastor. Dressed in a white suit, he stood tall and straight, like someone stepped out of a painting. I don't have a choice, I whispered, though a tiny, unacknowledged spark of anticipation flickered in my chest. After the wedding, we moved into Samuel's villa in Kensington. It was spacious, with a garden filled with roses. He gave me the south-facing room on the second floor, while he took the guest room at the end of the hallway, honoring our no interference agreement to the letter. Our first public display of affection came at a Harper family dinner. He arrived at the bookstore half an hour early to pick me up, and his brow furrowed when he saw my well-worn cotton dress. "Wait 10 minutes, he said, turning on his heel. When he returned, he was holding a Chanel box. Inside was a burgundy evening gown that made my skin glow like fine cream. "It's too expensive," I said, instinctively pushing it away. "If we're pretending to be a loving couple, we can't have people seeing through us." His tone was still flat, but he reached out to adjust the clasp of my necklace. His fingertips brushed my neck, cool and unexpected. I flinched as if burned, and his movements paused. Something complicated flickered in his eyes before he regained his composure. He looked after me throughout the dinner. When his cousin Emily asked, with a hint of provocation, "Isabella, how did you manage to snare my brother?" he subtly stepped in front of me, shielding me. "Bella is the kindest woman I've ever met," he said. "I'm lucky to be married to her." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried across the table. I looked up at him, and our eyes met. His gaze was so sincere that my heart skipped a beat. After that night, our contract relationship began to shift in subtle ways. He remembered I hated cilantro and would remind the chef to leave it out of our meals. He'd quietly bring me a cup of hot milk when I stayed up late doing the bookstore's accounts. On weekend mornings, he'd return from the corner bakery with fresh croissants still warm in the paper bag. Our 3 weekly reading sessions became our most relaxed moments. He'd sit by the bookstore window, reading architecture journals, while I organized the shelves. I'd glance up at him occasionally, sunlight dusting his hair like crushed gold. Once, I knocked a stack of books off the shelf. He caught them with quick reflexes, and I stumbled into his arms, breathing in his faint cedar scent. My cheeks burned instantly. "Be careful," he said, his hands on my shoulders, his tone holding a faint, unnoticeable note of concern. I straightened up quickly, avoiding his eyes. "Thank you." He laughed softly when he saw my flushed cheeks. "Isabella, you look like a ripe cherry when you blush." My heart raced faster. I turned away, pretending to rearrange the books, but I mixed up their order completely. He said nothing, just quietly helped me put them back in place. Every time our fingers brushed, my whole body tensed up. Autumn came quickly to London, painting the leaves golden and scattering them across Baker Street's flagstones. Samuel took on an old neighborhood renovation project and became swamped with work. Sometimes I wouldn't see him for days. I told myself it was just a contract, but an inexplicable sense of loss settled in my chest. One night, I came down with a fever. Half asleep, I heard the doorbell ring. Thinking it was the landlord, I dragged myself to the door, only to find Samuel standing there, still in his dusty work clothes, his eyes bloodshot. "Lillian told me you were sick," he said, helping me back to my room. He touched my forehead, his brow furrowing deeply. "Why didn't you tell me?" "You were busy," I mumbled, my head spinning with fever as I leaned against his shoulder. His body stiffened for a moment, then he patted my back gently. "No matter how busy I am, I can't just leave you like this." He fed me fever-reducing medicine, wiped my forehead with a cool towel, and stayed by my bed the whole night. I drifted off into a hazy sleep, and when I woke up, he was dozing with his head resting on the edge of the bed. Sunlight fell on his face, softening his usual sharp features. I couldn't help but reach out and brush his eyelashes. His eyes flew open suddenly, those gray-blue eyes still foggy with sleep. He looked at my hand, and the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "You're awake?" He sat up, his voice hoarse. "How do you feel?" "Much better," I said, snatching my hand back, my cheeks burning again. He smiled and touched my forehead. "Good, the fever's gone." His fingers were cool and comforting. I leaned into his touch without thinking, and his movements froze, his gaze darkening with something I couldn't name. After that day, the air between us grew even more ambiguous. He'd hold my hand naturally when we walked, wrap his arm around me during movies, and when others teased us about being affectionate, he'd smile at me, his tenderness seeming too real to be an act. But he never said he liked me, and I was too afraid to ask. What if it was just his good husband performance? What if I ruined even this fragile warmth by pushing for more? On Halloween, the bookstore hosted a parent-child reading event. Samuel took the day off work to help, much to my surprise. Dressed in a Spider-Man costume, he read Harry Potter to the children, his clumsy gestures making them giggle. I stood nearby, my heart feeling full of honey. When the event ended, he stripped off the costume, his forehead glistening with sweat. I handed him a bottle of water. He took it and tilted his head back to drink, his Adam's apple bobbing. Sunlight kissed his skin, giving it a healthy glow. Thanks for coming today, I said. We're husband and wife, aren't we? He looked at me, his eyes serious. Besides, I really enjoy being here with you. My heart skipped a beat. I was about to speak when Lillian ran over. Bella, there's a man asking for you, he says he's your old classmate. I turned and saw Mark standing at the door. We'd been high school sweethearts, but we'd broken up when he moved to America for work. Mark walked over and hugged me warmly. Bella, long time no see. You're still as beautiful as ever. His embrace lingered a little too long. I tried to pull away, and that's when I saw Samuel, standing not far away, his face as dark as a storm cloud. He was squeezing the water bottle so hard his knuckles whitened. And who's this? Mark asked, noticing Samuel, his tone tinged with challenge. This is my husband, Samuel, I said quickly, stepping closer to Samuel instinctively. He wrapped his arm around my waist, his grip tight, possessive. I'm Isabella's husband, he said to Mark, his voice cold as ice, a stark contrast to his usual demeanor. Mark's face darkened. He made small talk for a few minutes, then left in a hurry. After he was gone, Samuel still looked furious. He let go of my waist and turned to walk away. Samuel, are you angry? I asked, chasing after him. No, I'm not, he snapped, but his steps slowed down. Yes, you are. I grabbed his hand, it was cold. Mark's just an old classmate. We haven't talked in years. He turned around, his gray-blue eyes swirling with conflicting emotions, anger, hurt, and a softness I couldn't decipher. Isabella, his voice was hoarse, do you still like him that much? I don't like him, I said quickly. Looking into his eyes, I mustered up all my courage. Samuel, do you like me? His body stiffened. His gaze darted away, and he said nothing, just turned and walked off. I stared at his retreating back, my heart suddenly cold. So it had all been my imagination. Samuel didn't come home or to the bookstore for the next few days. I buried myself in work, trying to forget the awkwardness, but whenever I had a moment to spare, his gray-blue eyes would pop into my head, along with all the little things he'd done for me. Lillian couldn't stand seeing me mope. He obviously likes you, she scolded. He's just too stubborn to admit it. On Friday evening, London had its first snowfall of the year. I locked up the bookstore and walked through the snow, watching couples holding hands on the street. My heart felt heavier than ever. Suddenly, a black Bentley pulled up beside me. The window rolled down, and Samuel's face appeared. He looked exhausted, his eyes bloodshot, a faint stubble covering his jaw. Get in, he said. I hesitated for a moment, then pulled open the door and got in. The car was warm, filled with his familiar cedar scent. I'm sorry, he said suddenly. I shouldn't have snapped at you the other day. And I shouldn't have run away from your question. I turned to look at him, saying nothing. Isabella, he said, taking my hand. His gaze was earnest. From the moment I saw you in the bookstore, hiding from the rain, I've liked you. Proposing this contract marriage was the only way I could think of to get close to you. I was scared you'd reject me if you knew, scared I'd lose you. That's why I never said anything. Tears filled my eyes instantly. It hadn't been my imagination. Samuel, you idiot, I sobbed, throwing my arms around him. I like you too. He held me tightly, his chin resting on top of my head. His voice was thick with emotion. I'm sorry I made you wait so long. The snow fell harder, sticking to the car windows like white roses. He pulled back slightly and kissed me, softly, his lips carrying the coolness of the snow and his unique cedar scent. I closed my eyes, savoring his warmth, my heart overflowing with happiness. Later, we tore up the contract and had a real wedding, one that was ours. The sun shone brightly that day, and the roses in the garden bloomed vividly. Samuel, in his white suit, held my hand, his eyes brimming with tenderness. Isabella, he whispered in my ear, meeting you is the luckiest thing that's ever happened to me. I smiled and leaned against his shoulder, looking out at Tower Bridge in the distance. I felt so grateful I'd signed that contract, grateful he'd finally mustered the courage to speak up, grateful we hadn't missed each other. Now the bookstore has been completely renovated. Sunlight streams through the large floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating every book on the shelves. Samuel is still busy with work, but he makes time to visit me every day, sometimes helping me organize shelves, sometimes reading by the window, sometimes just watching me quietly. On a rainy afternoon, I leaned against his chest, reading A Tale of Two Cities. He stroked my hair gently as the rain pattered against the windows, wrapping the room in warmth. Samuel, I said, do you remember when we first met? You said I met your grandfather's requirements. He smiled and kissed my forehead. Actually, I'd been coming to the bookstore long before that, I just don't think you noticed me. My grandfather's requirements were just an excuse. The only reason I chose you was, you. I looked up into his gray-blue eyes, which reflected my face, as if holding an entire starry sky. From the very beginning, I'd been his destiny, the rose he'd been searching for through the rain and mist.